last time when we were talking about your life in Wales up to the age of 10, and then you went back to London and we left it there with no intention of where to go next, because we allow this conversation just to be led naturally, so we don't rehearse any of this, we just go with the flow. But then it came to me that we need to talk about relationships, because a lot of the trials and the burdens of your life were actually people relationships and the problems that people brought to you as a child, your parents and their problems, their parents and their problems. And so for all of us, we have issues in our own lives that go way, way up the chain to issues in their lives. And then where do you put the blame? Because we all have a responsibility to work out who and what we are and how we're going to parent. But if people go through their lives unthinking, unconscious, they will just carry out the same patterns of behaviour that they were brought up with in their own families, or they might have narcissistic tendencies, personality issues that they bring into the family. So let's do this now, not as a sequence where we go into your teenage years, because a lot of your teenage years were informed by the way that people treated you and your family treated you, and your family relations influenced even your marriage and who you chose. So you've mentioned your grandmother, and she was the mother of your mother. So what was the life of your grandmother like in her relationship, in her family? What did she have to go through?
Well, she went through quite a lot, actually, because she had 11 children and only 7 survived into adult life.
Wow. Did they all die as babies?
No. One of them in particular that stands out in my mind as being particularly tragic. She was doing her washing, and in those days there were no washing machines, so she had a tub on a chair in her lounge, and the hot water was on the fire. And to keep the fire roaring hot so she could get plenty of hot water, she put a poker in the fire to get the air underneath the fuel.
Yeah.
And she had a scrubbing board, and her 3-year-old daughter Flossie was playing by the fire on the rug while Granny was working. Unbeknown to Granny, she'd pulled the poker out of the fire, and whether she dropped it or laid it across her lap, I don't know. I imagine it hurt her hand and she dropped it. And in those days there were plenty of material, and it flared up and burnt her. And she was rushed to hospital. And my mother's recollection was they were all in bed late at night waiting to find out if Flossie was okay. And finally, at about 11:30 at night, their mother came home and said, "We've lost her."
Oh my goodness.
I mean, how do you recover from something like that?
Yeah.
So I think all this stuff made my grandmother less sentimental, if she ever was, and strong, because she had to be.
Yeah.
She couldn't have survived for the other children if she went under with stuff like that.
Yeah.
The other children I don't know about. I know one of them died at birth, was a twin, and that one died at birth. But I do know that my mother was totally unsentimental.
Yeah.
You know, there was no side with her at all.
So there was obviously a father. So the grandmother had married.
I think my grandfather then would have been at war.
Okay.
And when he came back from war, he changed because he'd seen such horrors that the only way he could cope with it was by drinking. And they didn't have much money, so he was drinking it all. And my mother had lots of small children that she had to feed, my grandmother rather, and there was no money.
Yeah.
So the only way she could do it was by machining clothes, teaching herself to make clothes and advertising them for sale.
Wow.
And that's what she did. And she made a bit of money, enough to feed the children, and she hid it in the copper because Grandad would come home having spent his money, whatever he'd got from doing whatever he did, and he would be looking for money.
So what's a copper?
Well, the copper is something that it has a tub inside. It's a brick built thing with some kind of basin set inside, and underneath is a place for a fire.
Mm-hmm.
So you light the fire underneath the copper. The copper is built in, it's not something you can move, and all the houses had them, the old built houses, and you put a fire underneath and that heated the water, and then you boiled your clothes in the top.
So that was like your washing facility.
Yeah, and I remember my Auntie Hilda had one in her old house after the war. We moved in with her for a short period, and she cooked her Christmas puddings in it. Lit the fire underneath, the water bubbled up, she popped her puddings in there.
So she didn't wash her clothes in there at some point?
Don't know about that. I don't know that she had a washing machine or if she was still using that for her clothes.
So she was washing in the copper. And
yeah,
then...
but I mean, you empty the copper, so the water you put in there to do your puddings is clean, it's not soapy.
Right, so the father, her husband, was in the 1418 war, came back traumatised because that war was
very traumatised,
horrific.
I'm sure, yeah.
And so then he wasn't relating to any of the children anymore. He was just drunk all the time.
I wouldn't say that, but I think he was relying too much on my grandmother, you know, and he wasn't considering. He had too much pain and he couldn't cope emotionally.
Yeah.
So he left all the responsibility to my grandmother and he did his own thing. That's the only way he could get through what he'd seen.
Yeah.
And cope with it.
And so basically she was on her own then, emotionally and with all her children, and she had all these children that she then had to raise and
feed, and
she was working as well
on her sewing machine.
And you couldn't learn that in those days from YouTube.
She said she made something and saw where she'd gone wrong.
Wow.
So she didn't do that again. And people were coming in and asking her if she could make them a skirt or make them a dress. And she was doing it, and she was getting money to feed the children in that way. And probably pay the rent as well.
So that's where your mother was raised, in that family.
My mother was one of the centre children.
And then it was your mother that was left when we were talking about Margate. She was like abandoned in Margate when she had to find her sister. So that was that family who then produced your mother. And then your mother grew up, met your father, who we've already talked about, handsome man, but nothing else. So met your father, had you and your brothers and sisters, so there were 4 of you children.
Eventually there were 4. I was 10 when the last one was born.
Okay. And then your relationship with your mother was quite strained, although you loved her. So then there's like a pattern from the generations down. Your mother then had a particular type of personality that you found it difficult. You didn't relate very well to her.
I related very well to her when I was young. I absolutely loved her to bits. And as I got older, she sort of emotionally withdrew. And I didn't like her quite so much, but I always felt sorry for her. But there were occasions when I absolutely hated her because she humiliated me. And when you're young and vulnerable and it's your mum, you don't expect humiliation.
So do you think that was what happened to her in her own life and she was...
I think basically when I started to grow up, I started to get better looking, and in a way I think somehow she resented it.
Okay.
But she didn't like resenting it, so she was trying to be nice to me, but she wasn't feeling it.
Yeah. So there was like a lack of ability to love and show emotion.
Yes, there was. Yeah, I don't think she loved anybody deeply after my father. I mean, she loved her babies, but as soon as they developed personalities of their own, then she disapproved.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so your father, he also had his own problems because he had a nervous breakdown. There was a job search problem. He didn't have work. And
I don't think that was it, actually.
I thought you said it was.
Well, it was part of it, but when we came back after him being in Wales with a small community that had known him from birth, they all knew him, they would wave at him in the street and all this, he loved all that. And his dad, he was with his dad.
Yeah.
And it was his home, it was what he'd always known. And then suddenly, the war's over, we go back to London, that's my mother's home and what she knew. And I think he just missed his home and his father.
Yeah.
And I don't really think he had grown up properly because in his family, he was next to the youngest.
Yeah.
And he was babied.
Yeah.
And that's how he'd always been. I mean, he left Wales and went to London looking for work, but then he could come and go as he pleased. But suddenly, he was married to my mum. She had children. It was where she wanted to be. Wales wasn't her home. That's where they met. And it was out of his hands, really. If he wanted to be with Mum, London was the place. And I don't think he really related to that very well. He wanted to be with his dad. He wanted to be with all the people that knew him.
Yeah.
So that was the problem, I think, with my dad.
And then that caused strain in your relationship with him because he changed for you. He went from being very loving to being very cold.
I loved my dad when I was a child, but once we went back to London, he withdrew emotionally. Well, he did have the breakdown. He had a nervous breakdown. And my mother said she thought that he was never going to work again. And she had another baby. That's when she didn't really want another baby. She only wanted 2 children. So it was really taken out of her hands. So the second baby died. I was the one to fill her arms and get her over her grief. And the third baby, she hadn't wanted, but he was a lovely looking baby, and my father adored him, and he adored him forever. And he put him before all of us. And then in 1946, my sister was born. Another baby that my mother didn't really want. But, I mean, she loved her when she got her, but she didn't want the pregnancy.
So, from the stories I remember you telling, you were left to your own devices, really. You had to grow up very quickly. You laid your own carpet in your own bedroom when you were 13.
I did.
And so you had to skimp and scrape. You had to earn your own money very early, buy your own clothes or make your own clothes.
There it is, get on with it.
If you wanted extra food, like a Weetabix, she would say, you can, but you have to have water on it.
That's right. Yeah, you can't have any more milk. So there was money there, and I resented that. They were saving up, and the saving up went on until they died, you know, and what is the point of saving up for whatever and going without while you're doing it?
Yeah.
What is the point?
That's what poverty does.
Yeah.
So if you grow up with poverty, you're always wanting to save, even though the need is there right now.
Yeah. We're saving for a rainy day. Mum, it's raining now. No, I'm saving up for it. We might get our own house, but Dad was never going to get his own house. That was never going to happen. He said all the right things, but he was never going to do it. So, we all went without because Mum was saving.
So you weren't properly clothed and...
No, we weren't.
You weren't properly fed. You were malnourished.
No, we weren't fed. We weren't. It was cheap this, cheap that, cheap everything, cheap meat.
Yeah.
You know, and if they did get a decent piece of meat, it was a tiny bit, so you could barely see it on the plate.
Yeah.
You know. Yes, so it wasn't a happy home.
Yeah.
My brother wouldn't take the girl that he wanted to marry home because the home was a mess. I mean, yeah, a real mess. And it was out of his personality. So he married somebody that he wasn't really in love with, but he, you know, he looked after her and he made money. So she had a good life, but it wasn't a happy marriage. And the boy I wanted, and we planned to get married, and in the finish he gave me up because he said he didn't want any babies he had with me to have my family's genes. So, I mean, it wasn't just me that was seeing things that weren't there.
Yeah.
It was not a nice place to be.
Yeah.
And they weren't nice people to be with.
Yes. So, then we come to your relationship. So, when you met the guy that became your husband, you married him because he was good looking?
No.
Because he had money?
No, I married him because I had to get away from home.
Yeah.
I had to get away from home. And a very nice boy came along. He was working in one of the newspaper offices. He took me out. He took me to lovely restaurants. He was good looking. He was clean. He was everything that I wanted. And I gave him up. And he said, why? I don't understand why. Why would he? He was everything I wanted. But I couldn't have another boy if I took him home saying to me, sorry, I can't marry you because of your family. So I knew that I was going to have to marry somebody that I wasn't in love with, so that if he gave me up because of my family, I mean, when you're young, you do stupid things. And that was the way I reasoned that I had to meet somebody that I wasn't in love with.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in love with that guy, and he wasn't in love with me. He wouldn't have treated me so badly if he had been.
Yeah.
And he wanted to get away from home as well.
And he came from a home where there was no love and very strict and very harsh upbringing by his mother. So he came with his own baggage of problems.
The way he treated one of my children I had with him was exactly the way he'd been treated. And I thought, well, in future, I'm going to have to separate this one child and always take him with me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
And when I finally left, he said he thought all his Christmases had come at once because I was taking him away from a situation that was horrible to him. And he was terrified.
And so there were lots of hardships and lots of suffering in that relationship, and there was no love, and the children didn't generally, except for one, receive any love, and one child was being abused, at least emotionally, maybe physically.
Physically and emotionally.
Yeah. And so that marriage ended because you had to rescue your children, really. You had to rescue
Basically,
at least one.
I had to get him away.
Yeah.
And I had to get me away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you had entered into that marriage to rescue you from your home life, and then you had to rescue...
And I married my home life.
Yeah. You entered into the same situation again, and then you had to escape again. So you now had 5 children.
Yeah.
So did
and no money.
Yeah.
Absolutely not a penny piece to my name.
And you were doing things like washing all the nappies, diapers, and putting them under your bed to dry them with your body heat.
Not soaking wet.
Damp,
yes. So I was drying them because I had 3 babies in napkins. So I had to have them ready for the next day. So I was folding the thick corners in and lying on them so that they were fully dry to go back on the children the next day.
And you had no health repercussions from doing that because you're strong?
Well, I think, somehow I got away with it.
Okay. Wow. So you lived this life then where you had were you working as well? You had 5 children. Were you at work?
At one point I did get a job, yes. I got a job because the children were getting older and I had to have more money. And my husband said, I earn the money, I'll give you what I think you deserve. So what I was deserving was such a small amount of money.
Yeah.
Keeping a house and 5 children and doing everything that I was doing wasn't deserving enough of a decent wage.
Yeah. So this is a bit like your dad all over again.
In a way.
So you married your dad.
In a way.
Combined with your mum?
Yeah.
Okay.
But no, I had 5 children.
Yeah.
In 4 years.
So you were divorced?
Because 2 of them were twins.
Yes.
I've got to add that, because 5 children in 4 years.
Yes, because we've already said that in the previous one.
Did we?
So now you have 5 children and no husband, and you have to go to work to support them. So then what did you do? Did you enter another relationship? Was there someone else?
It was the only way I could get away. I got a job in a laundrette, and a mechanic came to the laundrette, and we got talking. And I knew he liked me. He suggested that we got a flat together, and it was an escape. It was a door opening, just slightly.
So
if I went with this,
yeah,
I could get away.
So you didn't love him? Were you?
I did, actually. I did fall in love with him. He reminded me of the boy that I was engaged to, or getting engaged to, when I was 16. He was nothing like him, but at that time, I thought he was.
Yeah.
So yes, I did fall heavily in love with him.
Yeah.
And it was just magical, because I hadn't been in love for years.
Yeah. And so then you moved in together with your 5 children.
Well, I went round looking for somewhere to live, and then above this butcher's shop, I noticed there were no curtains up, and I just went in there and said, "Is anybody living upstairs?" He said, "No." And I said, "Is it an empty flat? Have you ever thought of renting it?" And he said, "Well, I don't see why not. You can have it if you want it." And we moved in there. And it wasn't furnished, so I had to get as much furniture out of the house as I could, which I did. I had to have the beds for the children, and I had to make a home of it, and I did. And it was a front bedroom, which was a living room and bedroom where I slept. And then there was a bedroom next door for the children and a kitchen.
So very small.
And we were there for 6 months. I got hold of the council and I said, "We're living under dire conditions." There were plenty of houses being built all over England at that time. They offered me one in Haverhill.
Yeah.
And we went to Haverhill.
And Haverhill is Suffolk.
Yes, and I got a 4-bedroom house.
Wow. That must have been like a palace.
Oh, I was so excited. Yeah, I was so excited.
And so this man that you were now with, he was with you?
Yes, he got a job. He went ahead because they built factories for the people that were going to be in these houses.
Yeah.
So he went down and he had a job available.
And you lived together?
And we moved in together.
And
I couldn't marry him. We intended to marry eventually when my divorce came through, but it took 5 years.
Wow.
To get a divorce in those days. It's a complete waste of life.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, it was as well that I didn't marry him, because it didn't work out.
Okay.
So I lost one of my children over him.
Yeah.
Because he was jealous of my first child.
Right, so you're now with this new man that you were living with that you thought was the bee's knees, and he ended up being a disappointment.
A great disappointment.
So he was jealous of one of your children, so one of your children had to leave.
And I had a nervous breakdown. And that was the second nervous breakdown. And it took me years to recover at that time.
And this is what they used to call mental health distress in those days, where you just mentally collapse and you go into a state of depression.
Yeah.
That's what they used to call
it. It was a deep depression. I couldn't cope with anything. I wasn't going to... The doctor suggested that I put my children into care while I was getting over it, and I said, "No, I'll manage." But it wasn't the same. You know, I sat there all day listening to music, trying to cope with life. And I remember walking up to a wall and wanting to bang my head against the wall to take the pain away. and it wasn't a physical pain, mental pain.
Mm.
And by then I'd had a baby, and I picked him up, and I knew that I wouldn't hurt myself while I was carrying the baby, so I wouldn't put him down. I was just walking around with him all day, and that was the state I was in. So.
And so the father of that baby was this guy that you moved into this house with, and so he was living with you all the time, or he was in and out?
He was in and out. He got a lodging somewhere because he decided that he didn't want to stay with me because I had all these children, and I think I was happy for him to go, except that when he went, I found I was pregnant again.
That was me.
That was you. And he wanted me to do something. He wanted me to have an abortion. So I went through all that, and I said that I wouldn't have the abortion. I think we've covered that.
We have.
And I think he sort of fell in love with this woman that was running this restaurant with her husband, and there was stuff going on there. But I decided not to have him back after that.
And he was sort of playing games with you because he kept on coming back
He did.
and going away.
Yeah, I can't live without you. I love you so much. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to me. But by then, I mean, he'd done it before and I'd had him back. But by then, all I had in my head was, I've lost one of my children over you. And I couldn't have him back. So whatever he said, I'd lost, something had died in me when I lost my child over him.
Yeah. Because the child had gone to his father.
And I never saw him. I never saw him again, not for years.
Because of the hard time that he was having with my father.
Yeah.
So you kept on marrying these or having relationships with abusive people from your abusive home life. So you had an abusive home life, you left home to abusive relationships.
The thing is, you don't know they're abusive because they're charming.
Yeah.
You know, they're everything you want. They're wonderful. They're going to do everything for you. They're like, how can anybody treat you like that? You're wonderful. And you think, oh, wow, somebody really likes me.
Yeah.
Until they've got what they want, and then it gets a bit boring. And, you know, it's like he said, you know, he's looking at me over a load of children. When is he ever going to get me on my own? Well, he knew I wasn't on my own. He knew all that.
Yeah.
You know, he knew I had 5 children when he married me, or when he joined his life with me.
Yeah. And he wanted a mother, really. So
he did want a mother because his own mother had died
when he was 3.
When he was very young, and his father had gone off, leaving him with his mother's, with his grandmother.
And they didn't love him.
No, they didn't. They had children of their own. Or young people of their own. So when they made a will at the end of their lives, they left him out because he wasn't their son.
Yeah.
They bought him a suit and they thought they'd done their duty.
Okay. So he had a mixed up life as well. So the two of you got together.
And he had a breakdown as well.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a relationship that was not going to go anywhere, although I didn't realise that at the time.
Yeah.
Nobody realises it at the time.
So you were having lots of problems with him. So he had left, and then he was setting up a court case. He was so mixed up. He was trying to get custody of me. And
oh no, he was threatening that he was going to do that. But there's no way he was going to do that. He was going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what would have been in his mind. And then he killed himself.
He did.
And then you were on your own again.
Yeah, but I mean, I cried when he killed himself, and I thought all those wasted years, all that passion, all that, the hopes and dreams for a good life from now on, and it was all for nothing. But then I started to think it's a relief in another way, because I was always frightened that he was going to snatch you, see you in the street one day on the way to school and snatch you. So in another way it was really, and I thought, why am I crying? It's taken a burden off me.
Yeah. And the other children didn't like him.
Well, not by then, they didn't know. No. I mean, he wasn't good to his own children, so I shouldn't have expected him to have been good to mine.
Because he had a previous relationship where
he had a wife.
2 children. Oh,
He left his wife when he went off with me, but he convinced me that they were getting a divorce. And it turned out that they weren't getting a divorce. They just weren't really getting on very well.
Okay.
But he had a home life, and he had 2 children, a boy and a girl.
Yeah. So this is what happens when you're sort of mixed up, from your family's mix up, your head's mixed up, you don't know what relationship really should be because your father wasn't a good role model, and then you meet these men that you're hoping are going to be the answer to everything.
Well, they convince you that they are going to be the answer to everything.
Yeah, they know how to play. And so then you go into these relationships and it's all messed up, and their relationships were all messed up anyway. He already was married, pretending he was going to get a divorce. You believed him, entered into a relationship with him, had another 2 children.
Well, he did get a divorce. He wanted a divorce. But by then he didn't want me.
By which time you had me and another child, so there were now 7 children. But soon after that, you then met a guy that was a turning point in some way.
Well, a neighbour, I'd made friends with a neighbour where I was living. I was with her one day when she got a phone call from her sister-in-law, and it was all about this woman that had left her husband, and he was heartbroken. And she'd gone off with somebody in the firm who was a foreman, and they reckoned that the fact he was a foreman had gone to her head, and you know, she always wanted somebody that was
high up.
Yeah. And she had left him. Well, he had 2 daughters. They'd grown up and had family of their own, and he apparently had moved with his wife to Suffolk because he came from Yorkshire and he was asthmatic from a child, and they thought the air was cleaner in Suffolk. And they bought a house and apparently were happily getting on with their lives when he found she was having an affair.
Okay.
And I'm hearing all this from this neighbour who was on the phone talking to her sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And then I was on my own, and she came down one day and she said, did I want to meet him? And I said, no more. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want anybody in my life. I don't want to see him. And then she said, well, you could probably do him good because you've been there and you've come through it and you're okay now. Even though you're on your own, you're okay. You know, you're getting on with your life and you're happy. And perhaps you could help him because he's taken an overdose and he's in hospital. They've saved him. But, you know, perhaps you could talk to him. And then she turned up one day and she said, this man is here, John. She said he's visited me. I'm going to bring him up to meet you. And I said, no, please don't do that. So she said, yes, I'm bringing him up. And she went away, and the next thing there's a knock on the door. And John's come up to see me. And it wasn't because he wanted me in a relationship. He wanted to talk to someone. And he wanted, you know, I'd been through it. And when he found out I'd been through it, how did you manage? What happened to you? And it was like he had something in common with me.
Yeah.
And he never seemed to go home. And we got on so well. And then eventually he, you know, a few weeks went by and he took me out to dinner, and then he obviously was feeling a lot better in himself. And then he wanted to take me to Yorkshire to meet his family. And while we were in Yorkshire visiting his family, his wife got on the phone that she wanted him back. So I said, well, you know, that is what you wanted. But by then he was upset, you know, I'm getting played up about here. So I said, well, we'll go back and you can see if there's a future there for you. So we went back and I said goodbye. And I thought, that's that, you know, it was a nice friend for a little while. And I carried on getting on with my life. But then he came back and he said, she doesn't want me. He said, she just wanted to get rid of you.
Oh.
She'd heard from the daughter that he'd met somebody, and she wanted him there in the background in case things went wrong, and she wanted him back.
Oh.
So then he said, no, I'm not letting her treat me like that.
Mm.
And I think he was thinking, you'll meet somebody else and then you won't be there for me either.
Yeah.
So then he came back and stayed.
So you then set up house. Well, you were in the house.
You got married.
You got married. I was 9 months when he came along. So I wouldn't.
He adored you.
Yeah, he was a very good dad.
He was. For the first time ever, I had somebody. I mean, he didn't have a lot of money, but I got a job.
Yeah.
In the sweet factory in the evening. He was there with the children, and we made a nice home. We had holidays, and by then most of the children had grown up and left.
Yeah.
And I just had you and David.
Yeah. And he was just normality. I didn't know any of the troubles that had been before I came along.
He was your dad as far as you were concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he used to walk around with you, walk around Berry, and he'd have you facing outwards as he's holding you. And people were laughing as they walked by, and he looked to see why. And you were pulling faces at them. He absolutely adored you.
Yeah, yeah. So we were very close, and everywhere he went, I was. If he was fixing the car, I was in the car.
If he was working out there, you were there with him, covered in grease.
Yeah. So that was a good bond for me, and so I was rescued really from my actual father by having this wonderful stepdad who raised me as if I was his own daughter. Yes. And David and all the other children then.
He was there for all of you.
Yeah. And then eventually he died.
I'd been with him for 23 years, and by then I think you'd all left home.
I was 24.
And I'd stayed with him in the hospital, and I couldn't believe what was happening, and I was determined I was going to keep him alive. But I failed. From when he told me that he wasn't well, and he went into hospital, 3 months, and he was gone.
And there was all sorts of medical negligence and a horrible experience in the hospital.
I had a big fight on my hand, just like I had when you were ill. And I thought, I'm never going to be free from this.
Yeah.
And I fought as hard as I could. I did everything I could to keep him alive. I rowed with the doctors. I argued with the sister. They weren't treating him right. Every time I left him, they were doing different stuff with him that was upsetting him and hurting him. And in the finish, he said, don't leave me. Don't leave me again. I can't cope with them. And I didn't. I stayed there.
Yeah.
And they were always trying to get rid of me. But I said, no, I don't trust any of you. I'm not leaving him.
Yeah.
And he died.
Yeah.
One night, they put him in a side ward. And he just faded away.
So then you had some years of coping on your own. Your children had all grown and married, some of them, and had their own children. So then you went through a very dark period of missing him, and also something that we all go through, realising what you had once it had gone. So we often take our relationships for granted, and then when the person isn't there anymore,
you have a moan.
Yeah.
You have a row.
Yeah.
Over trivia.
Yeah.
Something's annoying you. You're in a bad mood that day. Perhaps you didn't sleep well.
Yeah.
You have a moan, and then you sit there on your own, and you just want him back, and you want to rub out all those moans.
Yeah.
All those sad times.
Yeah.
But you can't because you've done it. But then you're only human, and everybody on the planet must go through something similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because there's a different way for believers, and when you have a prayer life, all of this becomes a bit different. But for now, once you were in that grief period, and so you were widowed, and then one day you were introduced to another man again. And this was Brian.
Yeah, that was well, I was grieving heavily for about 4 years. And I just didn't want to join the human race again. I wanted to get my life over and done with it. You know, I thought back over my life, and I thought, why did I come? It's been a mess from the beginning to the end. And then I thought, well, I'm still alive. I've got to join the human race. What shall I do? I joined one of the charity shops, loads of charity shops in Bury. And I joined the RSPCA charity shop. And I met a girl there and we became friends. And then one day on a coach trip, she said to me, what are you going to do with your life now? So I said, what do you mean? So she said, well, are you interested in meeting someone? I said, well, I have thought about it, but I said, I don't want a heavy relationship. I just want a friend, somebody to go out with for a meal sometimes, somebody to phone up and chat to. So she said, well, I know somebody like that. So this somebody had been married for 27 years, possibly longer, I can't remember. And his wife had died recently. He'd been on his own 7 months. I'd been on my own 5 years. And she spoke to him and said, are you lonely? She said, only I know somebody that you might be interested in meeting. But she didn't tell me. So I'd gone to America to see Heidi. And
my sister.
So this day I came back exhausted. I'd only gone to the shop because I was lonely after coming back from America and my family. And I wasn't really fit to go to the shop. I was exhausted. And I'd had an illness while I was in America. And I hadn't recovered from that. I'd lost a lot of weight. Anyway, I turned up at the shop and I thought, well, I'm working upstairs. Nobody's going to see me looking a mess. And Brian came in. And she called up the stairs. Gwen, could you come down a minute? And I clonked down the stairs in a pair of shoes that were too big for me. And I walked into the shop looking like something that the cat had dragged in. And there was Brian. And I went not realising, he was looking at stuff around the shop and he had a little look at me and I thought, oh, that gentleman, I noticed he looked at me as I came down the stairs. Didn't think anything of it. Then I went behind the counter and he came up to me and I said, oh yes, can I help you? And I thought he was going to buy something. And he said, a little bird has told me. And I went, oh, Sheila. And I thought, what do I look like? Anyway, he said, would you come out with me one day? And I quickly gave him my number on a piece of rough paper and he left the shop and I went, Sheila, how could you have done that? And we went from there. I met him out and we liked one another and we're still together.
And you've been really happy, you're very suited.
Happy. I've been with him 15 years now.
Yeah. So you met when you were about 70?
I think I was about, yeah, probably.
And you are always on holiday together, you get on really well.
We're not getting married. We don't want to mess with inheritance. So we decided just to be together, but to have separate lives in that way, financially separate lives.
Yeah. So you're married without the certificate.
Yeah.
Because people get confused with that. They think that the certificate, the ceremony is the marriage. But it's not. The relationship, the commitment and the love is the marriage.
And we actually married ourselves.
Yeah.
I made vows to Brian and he made vows back to me.
Yeah.
And we've kept them.
Yeah.
So we're married but not legally.
Yeah. And so this is really the happiest you've been because you're the most suited and you're the most relaxed and you just have good times together.
The last time I was happy in my life before Brian and John, I was 6.
Yeah. Yes, that's a long time. So we've talked about all these relationships, one thing after another. And if you could go back now and talk to your younger self, what would you say now about choosing a partner, what to look for? And also, what I want to bring into this is that you're describing the life of the Samaritan woman in the Bible. So in John's Gospel, the longest conversation that Jesus has with anybody is with this poor old Samaritan woman. She's young, But she's had 5 husbands and he doesn't come up to her. He goes to the well, especially to see her, really. She's getting water from the well at middays because nobody would be there in the heat of the day because she's an outcast from her own society, probably because she's had multiple husbands. She's an outcast within her own nation, so she's completely rejected, had these 5 husbands, so obviously had a lot of trouble. And Jesus goes there and he starts talking to her and has this long, long conversation. And he doesn't say to her, "Oh, you've had 5 husbands, you're terrible." He doesn't. He starts to talk to her and he tells her who he is, and basically he's chosen her. And then he chooses her to take his message over to her people to say that he has come, he's the Messiah, and he's arrived. So she is then sent like an apostle to go and reveal the Messiah has arrived. So this poor rejected woman who's had this, what must have been an awful life, all these relationships, she's now living with the 5th husband, and Jesus knew that. And so your story is a bit like this woman who's lived such a dejected, difficult life with these difficult relationships, one man after the other, and he still chose her. And she had this important conversation, the biggest one in the Bible, and then she had this important job of going to tell her people all about him. So if you had started your life with prayer, with a relationship with Jesus, right from the beginning.
A serious relationship.
Yeah.
I had a relationship with Jesus, but not all embracing.
You were a spiritualist.
It came and it went. Oh yes. My mother became a spiritualist, and at a very lonely time in my life I thought, wow, what I can talk to people, my family that has gone before.
Yeah. So that was your relationship. It was with spirits who had no great power, but we thought that they did. They had no great love for us except what might be family loves, because we believed that they were real. Now we know that they are not, and they may be something opposite to what we thought they were. But if you had had this most nourishing relationship with Jesus that we have now, and you had started out that way, and you had been able to get guidance from him, and he would have informed all your choices, you would have had a very different type of life.
I would have done, yeah.
So we are where we are now. You've had the life that you've had, and every relationship, everything we go through is important because it makes us who we are today, and we understand other people's problems today. And so what I want to get to is, if you were choosing again and you were advising your younger self, so younger people going through their relationship problems, now what would you say about choosing relationships or enduring relationships? Because there are lots of circumstances where there is abuse, and some of it is secret abuse, and it doesn't look obvious to the outside world. And so some of us have been asked to advise on people's marriages, and especially Christian pastors would be advising on people's marriages, actually having only half the truth. So sometimes the victim is the perpetrator, and they could make out that they are the victim and what should they do and they need help, and all the energy and resources goes to this person, but the victim is the other person. There's all sorts of games that can be played in relationships. And then often as believers we would say never ever get divorced because Jesus said you must never get divorced. But when Jesus was talking about marriage, he was being tricked into giving an answer about Herod, because Herod had broken somebody else's marriage to get this woman in his life. And so he was with this woman who was in another marriage. And so they said, what do you think of basically this, Jesus? Because John the Baptist had been arguing against it, and his head was chopped off because he was vocal about it. So they were trying to trick Jesus into getting into trouble. And Jesus said, let what God has put together, let no man tear asunder. So let no person break another person's marriage. And so that is super critical. Nobody should ever break another person's marriage, ever, under any circumstances. But on the topic of divorce, it's slightly different. So he wasn't saying never ever get divorced, because there are some relationships like yours where you had to rescue your children or a child from a really difficult situation. There are some relationships where you have to leave, otherwise you are beginning to abuse yourself, or you are cooperating or complying with the abuse of somebody else if you stay. So there are some situations where we would say, you have to leave. It is difficult if you stay. It's dangerous if you stay. It would be best to leave. And so followers of Jesus, I think, do get confused about that. And some people endure terrible relationships and terrible hardship, when actually they would be better under God's guidance, after lots of prayer, and as long as there's no abuse, enduring as much as they can endure until the abuse is obvious and they have to leave. And so really, I think if you were going to give advice to people, or if you were to talk about your life and set it against what other people are going through, is there anything that you would share about relationship, what you would look for, having been through every kind of relationship yourself?
Well, I think that sometimes you throw in your lot too quickly.
Yeah.
I think you need to take time to get to know the person, their good moods and their bad moods, and get to know them, the real person. And the only way you can do that is if you also meet their family.
Yeah.
Over a period of time, not one visit and you've made up your mind. Over a period of time, get to know people in different situations and give it time. I think if you're going to spend the next 60 years with someone, it won't hurt you to at least be courting for 18 months or 2 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, my mother married in 3 months.
Yeah.
I threw in my lot in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know?
I think also it's the agenda that you marry for. So your agenda was to escape home.
Well, another thing is when you're young, you haven't got the experience, it's urgent, you're unhappy, you've got to make a move, so you do something stupid too quickly. And also, I wished afterwards, with the second boy that I know I could have been happy with, I gave him up rather than take him home. I should have explained where I was coming from. I should have explained the family and my life, and told him to get to know me better and make up his mind. And while I was making up my mind, I should have at least told him. I just gave him up and he was confused. And I felt that to explain about my family would have been disloyal. But on reflection, I owed it to myself to tell him that I'd been left once because of my family. So is that going to happen again?
Yeah.
And giving him a choice in the early stages of our relationship before we actually went ahead with the relationship to see if we were suited.
Yeah.
Let him know the worst of having a relationship with me. Whether he wanted to see if we could go anywhere without him giving me up because of something outside of myself.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that because I was young and, you know, and I had nobody to advise me.
And then the other reasons why people marry are because he's good looking. So that was your mother. She married somebody who was good looking.
I was marrying somebody that wouldn't hurt me if he stopped loving me, because he didn't love me and I didn't love him.
Yeah. And then you married another way out. So there are all sorts of reasons why people marry. And sometimes they marry because they see this person as a financial
They want their own
security.
home, and this man and I will have our own home.
And then the problem comes with that because all these things can fall away within 5 minutes. So you find this man who's your financial security and you've married him for that, or woman, it goes the other way as well. All of these apply to both. And then within 5 minutes his business has gone wrong, or there's a terrible accident and all the money's gone. And if you only got into your relationship for that, then that's gone.
You haven't got a relationship anymore.
And then if
you've got to like the person, you've got to like them
because
before you love them.
I think there's something else as well. I think that rather than going for the sexual attraction, because that can go wrong, there can be an accident, there can be illness, and then the sexual part of your life has gone for various reasons, then there has to be something else that holds you together.
You have to love them. It doesn't have to be sexual. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be looks.
Yeah.
Just what they are.
So I would say then, from everything that I've seen and all the people that have talked to me about their relationships, when I see loving tenderness and support of one another, that seems to be the cement of the relationship. So it's not the good looks, it's not the muscles, it's not the attractiveness, it's not the finances.
It's the kindness.
Yeah, it is. It's the lovingness. If they're believers, that's even easier, because then they have a moral compass. They have a life where they're at least trying to live by a moral code that is God's rules and God's guidance and God's prayer and their prayer with God. So when it's a believer, it's easier, because if you're both believers, when you have troubles, and there will be troubles, every marriage is hard, because you're two separate people coming together to live out this life with two different ideas. And sometimes you can be united on almost everything, but there's always going to be a point where you have disagreement. So marriage can be very hard, and it shouldn't be easy to divorce because there are times where you just want to walk away. This is just ridiculous. This is awful. And you're having such a hard time, and you're exhausted, and you're having to cope with things, and maybe you've got children together and you can't cope and you get stroppy, and you definitely want the marriage to end. But for a good reason, it's hard to end it, because you have to get through all those hardships and come out the other side and become stronger. And so I think if you've already got the loving kindness, and if you've got faith together, you can pray about these situations, and then the supernatural power coming into your marriage gives you such a level of strength.
You also need to be able to apologise.
And admit that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And often you know you're wrong while you're doing it. You're just in a bad mood.
Yeah.
Something's gone wrong for you and you're irritated.
Yeah. And then there's a thing that I've talked to with other believers. So there's a different situation between believers in a marriage and non-believers in a marriage. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because we can't talk to people in their relationship if they're non-believers, because the rules are completely different, because they haven't got married under the grace of God by his divine blessing, because they don't even believe in him. So they've got married through a routine. They think they love each other, maybe they do, and then they're married, but they're not calling on him for help and support. So he doesn't help and support because they're not asking for it. And so then when we judge other people in their marriages or in their relationships where they're not married, we're actually doing the wrong thing, because we have the Holy Spirit helping us. We have Jesus helping us. They don't. And so we can't talk into their relationships. They have to have a belief. They have to have Jesus as their guidance. And then we can talk to them. So this is quite complicated, because a lot of people, a lot of believers will actually judge other people's relationships as non-believers and say, well, they're being sinners because they're living together and they shouldn't be. But they're not believers, so we can't do that judgment. God does that. That's for God to judge. We can only talk to people who are fellow believers who are having a struggle and not knowing what to do and how best to live. That's where we can talk to people and help and guide. Not that we are wise, but at least we have God's counsel through us. So when we talk to people, we hopefully have some insight. We have the Bible, we have a prayer life, and hopefully for those who are really born again with the Holy Spirit, we also have the Holy Spirit talking through us. So the situation of a marriage as a non-believer and a marriage as a believer is totally different, because as a believer, when you have hardship, you can pray, and in that prayer life, things can be resolved. And who knows, in all your relationships, if you'd had a prayer life and this relationship, your relationships could maybe have been made better. Some strange phenomenon would have happened to the other person and they would have been transformed, or maybe not. Maybe it would have still been that you had to leave these people because it was better that way, and then you ended up with the people who were better. So I think that a lot of people marry for the wrong reasons, and they marry as unbelievers without supernatural guidance. And if you marry for the wrong reasons, all those reasons can fall away, and then you're left with somebody that you have nothing with. And then you can have a great deal of unhappiness.
Well, another thing about marriage, I think when you're young and you fall in love, you think about marriage. But marriage is really connected with money.
Yeah.
Because you can say all those promises in your living room.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in a church.
Yes.
But you go to the church in the hope that it's got God's blessing. But the bit of paper that you signed, that we are now united, we are married, that means that your tax alters.
Yeah.
That means that if your husband leaves you, you're entitled to whatever he needs. You know, it's nothing to do with love.
Yeah.
So you come together in your own marriage, not because, oh, if he leaves me, you know, then what am I going to do?
Yeah.
But it's, if you love, that is all you need.
Yes.
If you're in love, that's all you need.
Yes.
And if you have responsibility for one another, that's all you need.
Yeah. And if you share the prayer life and you invoke the help of God, that's all you need.
If you go somewhere and they say, oh, you're not married, you can't have this, you can't, that's earthly.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with your spiritual life.
And it would be like saying that a child isn't born because they haven't been registered for a birth certificate. It's not the birth certificate that makes you born. You are born and you're alive. So people would say, well, you need a certificate to prove that you're married. Well, actually, you don't. You have your commitment to each other.
Yeah.
You're faithful. You're keeping
that
the vows.
bit of paper is nonsense, really.
Yeah. And where a divorce begins isn't with the divorce certificate. The divorce begins when one or both
decide you don't want to go on with the relationship.
Or even before that, it's the chipping away. So you've taken these vows, which are promises, and it's love, honour, respect, you know, all the things that we know in the vows. And then we start disrespecting and we start dishonouring.
So you've broken the vows.
You've broken the vow, and we break the vows practically weekly, but just not super seriously. So we're not in divorce mode yet,
and
most
you go,
of us.
Oops, and put it right.
Yeah, sorry.
Carry on with your relationship.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that, sorry.
And so it blows over and you're both forgiven. But if you keep chipping away, and some people are unfaithful,
in the finish, you just lose confidence in the relationship.
Yeah, and the person that does the divorcing, people will look down on and say, well, you shouldn't divorce. But the divorce happened with the unfaithfulness, or the person who withdrew love or withdrew intimacy. And so the divorce happens long before the divorce paper. And I think this is where a lot of people get confused. And there are some marriages that can absolutely be repaired from anything. And with Father's help, Heavenly Father's help, anything can be repaired. But there are some relationships that are so, we would say today, toxic. They're so irreparable because one person is not repentant, that person, I think, can be released from that marriage.
Yes, I think so as well.
Because Jesus was
compassionate. Can't go through your life unhappy and not achieving anything because of your unhappiness. Because you made one mistake when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And misread a situation.
And it can't just be like, oh, he doesn't listen to me. It can't just be trivial things. It has to be a really deep-seated, there is a great big burden in this marriage, and this person is getting more and more suppressed. Maybe it's making them ill, and this marriage is so bad that they would have to be released.
In fact, it's not a marriage at that point.
Yeah. There's no vows being kept on either side, or at least on one side. So there are situations where people do have to resolve their marriage by leaving. And a lot of people who are believers would say, under no circumstances should people leave. But if you do that to people, people can be badly abused.
Until it's them, probably.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Perhaps people shouldn't be giving marriage guidance and counselling until they've been through it.
Yeah.
Maybe the people, the rejects, the people like you, the Samaritan woman, who was married with 5 husbands over a period of time, they would be the counsellors, because they know what it's like. They know what their emotional burden was that led to them having 5 husbands. Why wasn't one enough? Well, there was obviously an issue. Perhaps they were very loved, but they didn't know what love was. And so they, like you did with one of your partners, your early boyfriends, you got rid of him thinking you couldn't take him home. Maybe she had that problem. And so Jesus is so compassionate. He wouldn't say, stay with that person through thick and thin, if that person was neglecting or abusing.
You could say you're not going to achieve anything in life if you stay with that person.
Yeah.
Because you're just not fitted. You're just different.
Yeah. And you don't go through divorce for nothing. Divorce is tremendously hard, and it's wounding, and it's financially hard. But there are some people who marry and divorce, like there are some women who do this for financial resources that they will get as a result of the marriage. So they play the game of divorce. But normally, that aside, divorce is such a big cataclysmic thing to do. It isn't something that people would just do unless there's something cataclysmic going wrong with their marriage.
Another aspect of the whole situation is, if somebody said to me, I've had a wonderful life, everything's gone right for me, my parents were wonderful, they had plenty of money, they gave me a good education, I married the right guy, I've had a wonderful life, I'd wonder why they came. And in my situation, there isn't much that I haven't had happen to me that I wouldn't be able to advise somebody else under similar circumstance.
Yeah.
So you gain information, you gain knowledge, and as horrible as it is when you're living it, at least at some point you could be useful to somebody.
Yeah.
If they came to you in desperation, you could say, well, this is what I should have done but didn't, but you can.
Yes.
I can tell you this now because I've been there.
And watch your intentions when you're choosing a relationship.
Yes.
Because if you're using them, they're probably using you. And when that job is finished, you've got to then live with that person. You've got to intend to live with them for life. That's the intention, that you're going to stay with this person for life.
Yes, exactly.
And you've got to stick with them through thick and thin. You can't just walk away when it gets a bit hard, because it is going to get hard.
Unless it gets treacherously hard.
If it gets dangerous for you or your children, and it becomes emotionally destroying, then of course you would have to move away from that person. Otherwise, you're being the perpetrator of your own victimhood. But then this is very complicated as well, because some people's bad relationship is another person's bliss. So this would need very wise counsel. Like, you think that's bad, what he or she did? That's not bad.
Well, it's bad for them, isn't it? If they feel it's bad.
Some people are a bit spoiled, and they would consider that something that was not particularly bad was terrible and they needed a divorce right away. So this needs a lot of counselling and a lot of thought before anybody says, oh yes, you must leave.
I remember somebody saying, oh, my husband was really nasty to me that day. You don't know what I have to put up with him. He's really miserable. And I'm thinking, yeah, so?
Yeah.
Is that all?
Yeah, so stay married if that's all.
You're lucky.
Married. It's hard on everyone being divorced. So just
don't go there.
Don't go there. Stay together through thick and thin, unless one of you is being emotionally harmed or physically harmed. And sex and all of that changes with illness.
Yeah.
With accidents.
Nothing stable.
Nothing. So what you married them for, if it's that changes.
It depends what level you've married somebody on.
Yeah.
It's got to be a deeper, not just attractiveness. He makes me laugh. It's got to be something on a deeper level.
Where you're pulling together. And there's another complication. And this is a chemical one, a chemical pollution one even. But women on birth control pills choose different types of men while on the pill than when they come off the pill.
Really?
Yeah. So they choose a more feminized male face.
Why?
Because the pill makes your body as if it's pregnant permanently. And when you're pregnant, you're looking for a nurturing man who's going to stick around. You're not looking for big square jaw man who's going to donate his seed. You're looking for the one who's going to nurture. But the problem comes when you come off your pill. Sometimes it works brilliantly and they're really pleased with their choice. But when you come off your pill, you find that this man that you're with, you don't feel a chemistry. Or can be, or you don't feel that you have a chemistry with them because you started or you married them when you were on the pill, and you're a different person on the pill from being off than from being off the pill. That's something to consider. And then there's gender bending hormones in the water. Atrazine is one of them in America, and that can reduce testosterone, and that can feminize men. So you've got this man that you've married who's slowly becoming very similar to you, and you're thinking, it must be me, there must be me that's the problem. And then there's the sterilization procedures or vasectomies that can change how the woman feels about the man or the man feels about the woman, because like with the birth control pill, the woman is different because she's now suppressed her fertility, and that changes all the senses all around her, and it changes her personality very slightly or sometimes dramatically. And so the man is then with a different woman. So all these changes, low fat diets can change your hormones. So you end up with not very strong hormones, and that can affect your relationship.
Well,
so you have to be healthy. So let's finish with this. What you have with Brian now, after all your escapades in all your relationships, what you have with Brian now is a man of your own age that you love, you're together, you pull together, you antagonise each other in a healthy way sometimes. You don't always agree, you're not always eye to eye, and that's healthy as well.
It doesn't last.
What doesn't last?
The antagonising.
No, it blows over, because one of you can say sorry and one of you says, okay,
You don't
you're
even
right.
have to say sorry sometimes. He even moans at me and I'd say, don't talk to me like that. And then it's gone.
Yeah.
Or I moan at him and he heaves a big sigh.
Yeah.
And storms out. And then he said, could you make me a coffee? And it's gone.
Yeah. So you're not at the point now where it's led by sexual attraction. It's now the heart response, the love, the tenderness, the
love
affection.
the man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so...
But it's taken me a while.
It's taken you all these years to discover.
I'm 86 and I found I can love a man without any pressure.
Yeah. Without an agenda.
Yeah.
There was no other reason to be together than that you could just love the man and he loves you.
Yeah. And he does manly things around the house. And I do womanly things for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, have we come to the end of that discussion then?
I think so.
So, be careful of your agenda, and the other person is not meant to make you happy. That's not their job to make you happy. They just need to get out of the way.
You need to be happy because of them.
Or they need to get out of the way to allow you to find your happiness. But they're not the source of your happiness. In my life now, my source of my happiness is God, that relationship first. And then I would want, in a relationship with a man, for God to be uppermost and foremost. Because if they've got that, that's what I want them to have. And then I would be second to that. And that means we've got a secure foundation. That for me would be the priority. That they have a relationship with God first, so that they have a prayer life, they have a moral code, they have a strong spirit, they have the strong Holy Spirit, and then I come into that relationship with that level of strength in the man.
Right.
That would have meaning for me.
Good. That's it then.
Okay, that's it.
Have we put the world to rights?
I think so. I think everyone's now very happy. They know exactly what
They
to
know
do.
what to do and when to do it.
And what not to do. thanks to your life,
Exactly.